Facebook caved and did take down a political ad by Donald Trump because he allegedly used an image that Antifa uses in an ad attacking Antifa and violent demonstrators. And they said it was a hate symbol. Completely, again, Alice in Wonderland logic. So I've talked oftentimes here about the assault on our First Amendment rights through big tech censorship. And the response I always get back is, "Oh no, it's not censorship if private companies do it." Well, A, legally that isn't necessarily true, and B, practically speaking, it isn't true, because a lot of these tech censorship operations are being directed and targeted at President Trump and conservatives and groups like Judicial Watch at the insistence of government officials who benefit from the censorship. Most specifically, we had the inability to talk about the name of the alleged whistleblower who was part of the coup cabal with Adam Schiff. If I mentioned his name here right now, YouTube would take the video down. Facebook would take the video down. Not because the law requires it, but because they bought into arguments by corrupt government officials like Adam Schiff that the name should not be public. Similarly, Facebook is also being challenged, and they do too much censorship of conservatives, but they don't want to do as much as the left wants them to do in terms of regulating and taking down ads and other material they don't like. And they are specifically outraged that they're not censoring political ads. And they don't mean leftist political ads, they mean Donald Trump. So sure enough, just recently, censorship did occur. Facebook caved and did take down a political ad by Donald Trump because he allegedly used an image that Antifa uses in an ad attacking Antifa and violent demonstrators. And they said it was a hate symbol. Completely, again, Alice in Wonderland logic. And, the question is, who's behind this? Who internally does this type of work? Now, they use oftentimes in the attacks on Facebook, on Judicial Watch, they do, quote, fact checks, which essentially is liberal opinions attacking Judicial Watch. It's not fact checking. It's just an effort to take down information they don't like by arguing about it, as opposed to saying there's something factually wrong. I mean, we're pretty darn careful. We're factual. So it's not really fact checking. It's just liberals pretending to fact check in order to suppress information they don't like. And this week we saw that with the Federalist, a news publication, and a website called Zero Hedge, where you had NBC running, I think, to Google based on specious allegations of, quote, hate speech or something like that from some unknown left-wing crank in Great Britain. So you had NBC News, who, by the way, is a competitor with the Federalist, is a competitor with conservatives that they try to suppress, actually actively go and try to pressure Google to, quote, demonetize the Federalist. Now, if you've tracked the Federalist online, it's a critique of it. They are journalists that focus on critiquing the deep state, exposing the worst corruption scandal in American history, and taking a different approach than the anti-Trump media that is now controlling much of our political discourse. So NBC News tried to destroy their competitor. I mean, I was interested to know that I saw, obviously everyone focused on Google, and Google backtracked a little bit, but I was focusing on the fact, well, can NBC legally do that type of activity under our antitrust and false, unfair competition laws? Justice Department should investigate that. I don't know. There are probably lawyers watching this who are probably thinking, I wonder what happened. I wonder if that's true or not. Well, I would encourage you to research it, because I think it might be true that there might be a case, something to investigate. Was it anti-competitive? Is this anti-competitive activity that's barred by our antitrust laws? I don't know. But they're targeting competitors. We think it's always philosophy. Well, maybe it's just money. Maybe it's just money. So Facebook, in reaction to this pressure to censor everything that's being posted, based on rules that the left has set out, has created what is called, what I'm calling a censorship board. And they have these independent, it's supposedly independent, and they've kind of semi-bound to implementing its decisions. And if you don't like decision making or you got complaints, you can go to this censorship board. Well, guess who has significant ties to most of the members on the board? George Soros, the left-wing billionaire, who has really a radical agenda, and he's a pretty influential character with this board. So now, effectively, you've got George Soros, and it's not necessarily him personally, but that worldview is now controlling the majority of the Facebook censorship board. How do you think Judicial Watch is going to do with that board? How do you think the president is going to do with that board? How do you think you're going to do with that board? So we did a deep dive into the named members. They've got one or two nominal conservatives, actually some pretty good people on the board. Facebook has been, they've been far from perfect, but they're under tremendous pressure to go full totalitarian against conservatives. That's pretty clear. As our Corruption Chronicle blog details, the censorship board is stacked with leftists, including a close friend of left-wing billionaire George Soros, who served on the board of directors of his Open Society Foundation. That's his main vehicle for funding the radical left. I think he transferred 18. I'm going off memory here, so double check me. $18 billion to the foundation. Incredible amount of money. Incredible amount of money. Andras Sajo, S-A-J-O, is the founding dean of legal studies at Soros's Central European University. He was a judge at the European Court of Human Rights for nearly a decade, and he served on the board of directors of the Open Society Foundation's Justice Initiative. He was one of the judges in an Italian case that ruled unanimously that the display of a crucifix in public schools in Italy violates the European Convention on Human Rights. So we've got an anti-Christian Soros acolyte on the Facebook censorship board. The decision, thankfully, was subsequently overturned. At least 10 other members of the Facebook Oversight Board are connected to leftist groups tied to Soros that have benefited from his generous donations, according to our research. Alan Rusbridger, a former newspaper editor from Britain and principal at Oxford University, serves on the board of directors of the Committee to Protect Journalists, which received $750,000 from the Open Society Foundation in 2018. They one of his organizations co-hosted a conference with Open Society on change in the Middle East and North Africa. Another human rights attorney is the program manager for Soros's Open Society Initiative for West Africa. Her research includes critical race feminism and socioeconomic rights of the poor. Sounds like a traditional hardcore leftist. An Indian lawyer and civil society activist runs a progressive nonprofit called Center for Law and Policy Research that focuses on transgender rights, gender equality, and public health. And she indirectly gets money from foundation through another group that it received $1.5 million or so from the Open Society Foundation between 2016 and 18. And she also gets money from this radical group called the Center for Reproductive Rights that promotes abortion on demand. Also, a Soros grant recipient. So I could go on and on with the names, but you're getting the point, aren't you? Radical leftists, many of whom aren't even Americans, trying to figure out how the First Amendment applies here in the United States. So I know the administration is considering undoing or restricting the liability protections these big companies have that allow them to censor with not much of any consequence. I'm not quite sure how the law should go there. And it's been my initial impression that as long as they are doing this type of radical censorship and policing the material on their boards beyond the sort of basic rules against, sex, pornography and violence, and advocating specific violent acts, they're not really protected by the law because they're not acting as bulletin board managers. They're acting as publishers with all the attendant liabilities. Now, the irony is that if that's the case, they will, in theory, be able to censor all sorts of people. But on the other hand, if they are considered kind of like the manager of an airport or of a mall where there's kind of a quasi-public component of that private space that allows First Amendment protected activity, it may be they have to stop censoring conservatives, which is all what we want. And as I said before, the reason this is happening is because we're winning. NBC News and all these leftists, like, Hillary Clinton's calling on, for instance, the censorship of Trump. This is very political. It's because they're losing. And when you lose, if you're a leftist, what do? You cheat. You violate the Constitution. You break the law. You suppress your opposition. That's what the left does. They don't want to have debates. They just want to win. They will pretend to believe in debates so that they can win, but if debating gets in the way and they can get away with it, they'll skip it. You see that with the Supreme Court. You see them with tearing down statues. You see the left tearing down statues. We can have a debate about what statue should be where. We're our republic, after all. We get to decide things like that, as long as it doesn't impact private property in a unconstitutional way. They don't want to have a debate. They just want to exercise raw power, and they'll do it under the threat of violence. It's clear. And and I want to end with a call to action for you as well, is to demand that Congress support the police, demand that the executive branch support the police. I'm completely aghast at what's happening. We had the police under murderous attack. We have that police officer in Atlanta being charged with felony murder that could result in the death penalty, where the video shows he was obviously defending himself from someone who could have disabled him and then killed him. A wildly political prosecution, abusive prosecution. That prosecutor shouldn't be prosecutor. Certainly in that case, if I were the state, I'd remove him. We have this violent insurrection, the secessionist movement in Seattle. They're trying to impose similar enclaves in other cities. And what's the reaction on this war on police? Well, let's come up with harassing regulations that do nothing to increase the public safety, but do everything to make the jobs of the police that we rely on to man that thin blue line more difficult. I looked at the administration's executive order. At best, it's harmless. At worst, it sets up an infrastructure for the left to harass the police with. Same in Congress. I mean, the Pelosi's bill would, essentially give LaRossi and the ACLU the ability to shut down police departments. You think the Republicans are going to stop that? I don't know. Doesn't seem like it to me. Where are the priorities here? We have our Constitution under assault from the Supreme Court. We have our lives under our republic under attack from insurrectionists and violent leftists. And what's Congress doing? Attacking the police. Attacking the police. So now Judicial Watch is doing what we do best, which is we're investigating some of the cases that are under discussion. For instance, we filed FOIA requests related to the killing of George Floyd. Some of that information is still being withheld. Like the body camera footage. Why are they withholding it? We're suspicious. Let's put it this way.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all the latest news from Judicial Watch.